Patu of the Moon, Te Patu o Te Mārama. This story is a work of fiction created with deep respect for the culture, land, and spirit of Aotearoa. It draws inspiration from Māori values such as kaitiakitanga, wakapapa, and connection to nature. It is shared with aroha and reverence, in hope of honouring the beauty of the land and the strength of its people. Chapter 1. The River and the Moon. The old man spoke without looking up. Place the Patu in the river before the moon reaches its highest point, and don't come back for it until sunrise. Kahu stood barefoot in the cold grass, clutching the carved greenstone in both hands. The Patu was heavier than it looked, deep green with swirling veins of white and gold, like a storm frozen in stone. His father had carved it himself, but he wouldn't say from where the stone had come, only that it was gifted, not found. The necklace, also greenstone, hung around Kahu's neck, warm against his chest, even in the night air. "It's not a weapon," his father had said. "It's a key, and you're the door." Kahu didn't know what that meant, but he had learned not to ask too many questions. His father wasn't the talking type. He was the kind of man who stared at rivers and saw things in them. So Kahu walked alone down the narrow path that led to the sacred bend in the Awa, the river that curved like a sleeping eel through their ancestral lands. The moon above was nearly full, rising like a silver coin over the hills. The wind was still. The night was silent, except for the quiet hush of water moving through stones. When he reached the water's edge, he stopped. The river glowed faintly, not from the moon, but from itself, like it remembered being more than water. Kahu knelt. He held the Patu over the surface, and for a moment he hesitated. It felt wrong to let it go, like handing over a part of himself. "Trust the water," his father had said. So he did. He slipped the Patu beneath the surface and laid it on a smooth, flat stone just below the current. It settled like it belonged there. Then he unclasped the greenstone necklace and placed it gently beside the Patu, half submerged. The water shimmered. A pulse of light rippled outward from the stone, not bright, but enough to make the hairs on his arms stand up. Kahu stepped back. The river kept flowing like nothing had happened, but something had. He sat on the bank until his legs grew numb and the moon reached its peak. He thought he might see something, a spirit, a sign, anything. But the night remained still. Eventually, he lay down on the mossy bank, the sounds of water and wind lulling him to sleep. He woke at first light. The mist clung low to the ground and the river was quiet. Birds were beginning to stir, tui, bellbirds, and somewhere a distant hawk cry. Kahu sat up and walked back into the water. The Patu was still there, but changed. It no longer looked like carved stone. It looked alive. The greenstone pulsed softly, as if breathing. The necklace beside it shimmered with a faint golden glow. When Kahu reached into the water, the current stilled. The cold didn't bite him. He picked up the Patu. It hummed in his hands. The necklace slid into his palm. He held it to his chest, and the warmth spread through him like sunrise. A quiet voice, not outside, but inside, spoke. "Follow the light beneath the stone." He didn't know what it meant, but he felt it. As he walked back along the river path, something moved ahead, a flash of feathers. He stopped. A small fantail danced in the air before him, its tail fanned wide. It hovered, flitted to the left, then right, then circled him twice before darting ahead again. Kahu followed. The path twisted where it hadn't before. The trees leaned closer. The air thickened, not with mist, but with presence. The fantail led him to a narrow trail he had never noticed. It veered away from the river and toward the hills, toward the old limestone cave he had been told never to enter alone. He paused. The Patu in his hand pulsed once. "Follow the light beneath the stone." The fantail chirped sharply, waiting at the edge of the trees. Kahu took a breath. Then he stepped off the path toward the cave, the Patu glowing faintly in his hand, like it knew the way better than he did. Chapter 2. The Cave of Stars. The path narrowed as he climbed. Roots gripped the ground like knuckles, and ferns brushed his legs as if testing who he was. The air cooled with every step, but the Patu in Kahu's hand remained warm, gently pulsing, guiding him forward. The fantail flew ahead in bursts, then waited, then darted again, always just beyond reach. Kahu had only ever seen the cave from a distance, a dark hole in the side of the limestone bluff, whispered about by elders but never spoken of plainly. Some said it was a place of bones, others a place of dreams. Either way, you didn't go there, not alone. but he didn't feel alone. As he reached the cave's mouth, the fantail gave one final flutter and disappeared into the trees. Kahu looked into the dark. The Patu began to glow, softly at first, then brighter, casting green-gold light across the cave walls. He stepped inside. The air changed. It wasn't just colder, it was deeper, like the air was older here, thicker with memory. The cave walls narrowed, then opened into a chamber, and suddenly the light from his Patu caught something above. Stars. No, not stars. Glowworms. Thousands of them. They covered the ceiling like a sky caught beneath the earth, pulsing, flickering, twinkling in constellations that felt familiar, though he couldn't say why. He stood in awe. The light from his Patu dimmed slightly, no longer needing to lead. It was the cave's light now, the earth's light. He walked forward slowly. In the center of the chamber was a still pool of water, black and perfect, reflecting both the glowworms above and his own face below. But the reflection shifted. It wasn't him anymore. It was a woman, older, regal, wrapped in a corduroy cloak woven with feathers, leaves, and patterns of light. Her mokokawe glowed softly in the reflection, and her eyes were endless. Kahu spun around, and she was there, standing at the edge of the pool, not walking, not appearing, simply present. She looked at him with neither smile nor frown, only calm, knowing. "You've answered the call," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it filled the chamber as though the stones themselves were listening. Kahu opened his mouth, but nothing came out. She raised a hand gently. "You are not here to speak. You are here to listen." He nodded. The glowworms pulsed above them, in time with her breath. She stepped toward him. "Kahu, the land remembers you. The birds remember you. The river knows your name. But the people have forgotten how to see, how to listen, how to live as part of the world, not apart from it." She reached out and placed 2 fingers over his heart. The necklace warmed under her touch. "This Patu is not for war. It is for waking. It is carved not from stone, but from memory, shaped by all who came before you. You are not the first to carry it, but you may be the last." The air thickened with her words, like they were falling into the cave walls, etching themselves in stone. She gestured to the pool. "Look." Kahu stepped closer and peered in. The water shifted, showing visions, not reflections. Forests cleared, rivers dammed, seabeds stripped bare, fields of plastic, children hungry, oil in sand, salt in the veins of the land. Then the image changed, hands planting kumara, birds returning, people gathered in circles, laughing, markets by the sea, forest paths winding through farmland, old men smiling, young ones listening. "This is not prophecy," she said. "It is potential. You carry the key, but you must speak for those who cannot, for the soil, the stream, the ruru, the whale." She placed a small carved stone into his hand, a spiral etched into its center. "This is the koru, life returning. It will guide you when memory fades." He looked up, but she was gone. No footsteps, no sound. Only her cloak remained, a single feather floating down, landing softly on the still surface of the pool. He reached for it. It vanished. The cave was silent. The glowworms pulsed once, as if breathing. Kahu took a breath. Then he turned and walked back toward the mouth of the cave. The Patu pulsed again, not with magic, but with certainty. Outside, the light had changed. Birdsong echoed louder. The trees were greener than he remembered. Even the wind seemed to carry something ancient. He stepped into it. The hawk cried far above, watching. The owl blinked from a low branch nearby, and the fantail, waiting at the bottom of the path, fluttered its tail in approval. Kahu walked forward. The journey had begun. Chapter 3, Signs from the Sky. The wind had changed. Kahu could feel it, not in gusts or temperature, but in the way it moved. It no longer passed through him. It touched him, like an old friend brushing his shoulder. He had returned from the cave with no instructions, no map, only the memory of the woman's voice and the spiral stone now tied to his necklace, and the knowing. That was the strangest part. He simply knew things now. He knew when the rain would fall, even if the sky was clear. He knew where to place his foot on a slippery rock, and he knew when the birds were near, even before he saw them. The hawk was always first. Kahu would be walking along a ridge or sitting near a stream, and he would hear it, a single cry, high and sharp, echoing down from above. Looking up, he'd see it. The Kahu, circling slowly, wings wide, riding the wind without effort. It never came close. It didn't need to. Its presence was not for comfort. It was for clarity. A watcher in the sky, a signal that the world was paying attention. The owl, though, the ruru, was different. It came only at dawn or dusk, appearing without sound. Once, it had landed beside him as he sat by a fire, watching the embers burn low. It had tilted its head and stared straight into his eyes, as if reading something behind them. Since then, it had returned often, perching nearby when he spoke, flying ahead of him when he travelled. Once, it even landed on his shoulder. He didn't move. He barely breathed. The weight of it was light, but the meaning was heavy. And then there was the fantail. The puakawaka was joy wrapped in feathers, always arriving just before something important happened. It darted in and out of his path, never still, but never lost. Sometimes it flew into places no bird should be, a courthouse, a shop, a train station. People would gasp. Kahu would just smile. The bird was always exactly where it needed to be. One morning, he walked through a patch of bush not far from the edge of town. It was a forgotten corner, old fence posts, rusting metal, weeds, and blackberry vines. But in the centre stood a young kōhai tree, half choked by the overgrowth. He paused. The tree's leaves were dry, its branches sagged. It was alive, but only just. He stepped closer. The patu at his side pulsed once, not bright, just enough to say yes. Kahu knelt and laid his hand on the earth beside the roots. He didn't say anything, didn't chant or pray. He just listened. The ground was quiet but thirsty, not for water, for care. So he pulled away the weeds, dug a small trench to clear the roots, and found a buried pipe leaking rust into the soil. He broke it off with the patu. Then he reached into his satchel and pulled out a small handful of sea salt, the same he had carried since his visit to the river. He sprinkled it around the base of the tree and pressed his palm to the bark. "You're not forgotten," he whispered. A breeze moved through the bush. The branches above shook gently, and the kauhai released 3 bright yellow flowers, one by one, falling onto his lap. He looked up. The hawk circled above, silent. The fantail landed briefly on the pipe, then darted away. The ruru watched from the shadows. Word spread, not by internet, not by newspaper, but through the land itself. The next day, a local teacher brought her students to the bush to sketch the kauhai tree. The day after that, someone cleared the weeds and planted 2 more natives beside it. By the end of the week, the fence had been rebuilt. A small carved sign had been placed beside the path. Tree of Light, protected by the people. Kahu didn't tell anyone what he had done. He didn't need to. The land had spoken for him. That night, as he lay beneath the stars, a mist moved through the trees. The air was warm, even though no fire burned. The ruru landed near his feet and blinked twice. Then came the whisper, soft as a leaf falling. "One act of care is louder than 1,000 complaints." Kahu didn't know if it came from the owl or the wind or the stars, but he wrote it down in his journal. Because now, the journey had truly begun, not as a message, but as a movement. Chapter 4, The Circle of the Sea. The sea had always felt like a boundary, a place where land stopped and something else began. But for Kahu, it was more than that now. It was a voice, a living being, a deep breath waiting to be released. He stood on the shore, Patu at his side, the wind rolling in across the waves. The tide had pulled back, leaving long mirrored streaks of wet sand that reflected the sky. The sun was rising, soft and gold, and the salt in the air carried something old. Behind him, the people gathered. At first it was just a few, a fisherman and his daughter, an elder from the local marae, a couple who brought folding chairs and tea. But by mid-morning, there were more than 100. A truck arrived with crates of kai moana, snapper, mussels, kina, caught that morning. Someone brought drums, someone else, a guitar. Kahu didn't ask for a stage. He stood on a smooth black rock near the tide line and let the water reach his feet. The ruru perched on the driftwood beside him. The kahu circled silently overhead. The fantail danced through the crowd. Cameras were there too, a few from local news outlets, one from a larger national channel. People were curious. They'd seen the videos, heard the rumors. The man who makes trees flower, the one the birds follow, the voice of the land. Kahu said nothing for a long moment. Then, when the tide began to return, he raised the patu gently toward the horizon and spoke. "This ocean has fed us since before we had names. It gave us life, stories, teeth, bone, and now it feeds corporations. He turned slowly to the crowd. We buy frozen fish while the sea swells with abundance. Why? Because permits are expensive, because quotas are sold to the highest bidder, because the food meant for the people is hauled out by ships the people will never see. A few heads nodded, a few tears. But what if the food stayed? What if you, the fishermen, the aunties, the cousins with dinghies and handlines, could harvest kaimwana and sell it right here, on the shore? He stepped back and gestured to the crowd, like fruit stands, like Sunday markets. Fresh from the ocean to your neighbor's table, no middleman, no plastic wrap, just the sea feeding her children again. There was a murmur in the crowd, not disbelief, but recognition. The land has gardens, the hills have goats and hens, the forest has medicine, but the sea, we've locked her away. It's time to open the gate. He held the pāto higher. Let the law make space for coastal markets, not giant trawlers, not quotas for export, just community and the ocean's gift. Let the food stay home. Silence followed, not empty, but full. The kind of silence before something sacred happens. Then it began. A ripple on the horizon, a glimmer of motion far out in the waves. Someone pointed, then gasped, "Dolphins!" A pod of dolphins breached, not once, but over and over, spiraling together in synchrony. They circled in wide arcs, creating a pattern in the water, a spiral, a koru, alive and dancing. Then, closer to shore, manta rays appeared, gliding like giant wings through the shallows. Stingrays followed, skimming just beneath the surface. A whale surfaced. The sound of its breath echoed over the beach like a taonga being played. Mist rose from its blowhole, catching the sunlight like a soft explosion of stars. And then, the rainbow. It didn't come from the land. It arched directly from the sea. A perfect, wide, glowing rainbow, stretching from one side of the bay to the other. Not faint, but rich and radiant, as if the ocean had painted it with its own hand. The crowd stood in stunned silence. Children clung to their parents. Elders held hands. The journalists lowered their cameras. And through it all, Kahu stood still. The ruru blinked. The Kahu glided low over the water. The fantail hovered beside him like punctuation. The sea had spoken. Later, no one could explain it. Some said the timing was coincidence. Others said he planned it. But most just nodded slowly with something ancient behind their eyes and said, it was right. That afternoon, families lined the shore selling fresh fish. No permits, no fences, just ice in buckets and honest hands. People paid in cash, in bread, in korero, and no one went hungry. That night, Kahu walked alone along the shoreline, the tide soft at his feet. It's starting, he whispered. Not a movement, not a protest, a return to simplicity, to sharing, to the sea. And above in the black sky, a single shooting star passed silently over the bay, its tail faint, but full of promise. Chapter 5, The Garden of the Future. The town was quiet when Kahu arrived, the kind of quiet that settles into cracks. Shops were boarded up, playgrounds rusted, the bakery had closed 3 winters ago. A single petrol station kept the place running barely, but the hills were still green, the soil still rich, and something deeper still lived beneath the surface, waiting to be remembered. Kahu met with the local council in a dusty hall with stained carpet and flickering lights. There were 5 people at the table, each with folded arms and furrowed brows. He stood before them, Patu at his side, ruru on the windowsill, the Kahu circling outside. The fantail had flown in earlier, tapping once against the glass before perching on a coat hook. He didn't ask for money, he asked for land. I'm not here to build a business, Kahu said. I'm here to plant a memory. He rolled out a map of the town and pointed to a long, overgrown paddock near the edge of the community. This land belongs to the council. It's been untouched for years. I propose we give it back, to the people, not to own, but to grow. We build community gardens, not token beds in a corner, but real land, for kumara, pumpkin, silver beet, beans, and rongoa plants, staple food, medicinal food, indigenous food. The councillors shifted. We invite everyone, elders, youth, those doing community service, those seeking reconnection, not as punishment, but as restoration. One councillor spoke up. What happens when people steal from the garden? Kahu smiled gently. You can't steal from something that's meant to be shared. That's the point. They didn't say yes immediately, but they didn't say no. And 2 days later, the fences were opened. The first day of planting was quiet. Kahu worked alone, turning soil with his hands, clearing rocks, whispering to the ground. He planted 3 rows of kumara, 1 of corn, and a border of kawakawa and marigolds. The next day, 2 tamariki showed up with their grandfather. They planted beans. By the weekend, a dozen people were working the land, digging, composting, mulching, laughing. A man on community service showed up with a bag of pumpkin seeds and stayed until sunset. A kaumatua arrived with a bucket of saved heritage seeds, wrapped in cloth with tears in his eyes. "My grandfather grew these before the war," he said. "They've been waiting." A week later, someone built a sign. Ngamara o te hapori, the gardens of the people. Another brought a canopy, a fold-out table, and a handwritten chalkboard that said, "Veggies by Koha. Take what you need, give what you can." And it worked. People came with coins, home baking, extra seedlings, and long stories. No one walked away empty-handed. Kahu didn't lead. He watered, weeded, and listened. He taught the kids to make compost tea and told them that worms were more powerful than politicians. He sat with a grieving father who had lost his son to addiction and told him how trees root deeper after a storm. He watched a man once hardened by the system weep while planting lettuce. "This is the first thing I've grown since I got out," he said, "and it's the first thing that's grown me back." And through it all, the birds came. The kahu watched from the treetops, silent and watchful. The ruru perched on the compost bin at dusk, hooting low as stars appeared. The fantail danced between the rows, brushing each seedling like a blessing. And the land responded. The beans grew fast, the soil became richer. Flowers bloomed where none had been planted. The whole area took on a quiet glow, not magical, but deeply alive. Children said the leaves sparkled when the sun hit them. One kuya swore she saw the ground breathe. No one argued. They just kept planting. Later, a reporter arrived, not from the city, but from a small rural station. She walked the gardens with Kahu and asked only one question. "What do you hope comes from this?" He looked around at the people tending the soil, the laughter, the baskets of kai, the shy smiles. "I don't want supermarkets to disappear," he said. "I just want them to have to compete with the soil again." That night, Kahu sat at the edge of the garden, watching the moon rise over the hills. The ruru landed beside him. He held the patu gently, feeling its warmth in his hand. "We've fed the roots," he whispered. "Now we see what grows." The earth made no sound, but the leaves shimmered just slightly, glowing green, like emeralds under moonlight. Chapter 6. The Parliament Steps. The stone steps of Parliament had seen many shoes, suits, leather boots, polished heels, but they had never seen bare feet carrying a patu made of greenstone, glowing faintly with purpose. Kahu walked calmly through the crowd, his long flax coat brushing his ankles, the carved spiral stone hanging at his chest. Around him, hundreds had gathered, people from the coast, the bush, the valley towns, even a few from cities who had once only watched from screens. The air was heavy with expectation. News crews had arrived early. Tripods crowded the edge of the square. Drone cameras buzzed quietly above, trying not to interrupt the silence. At the top of the steps, he stopped. The kahu circled high above the beehive building, wings stretched wide. The ruru landed on a nearby lamppost, blinking slowly at the rows of politicians watching from the windows, and the pawakawaka, ever present, darted in joyful loops through the crowd before settling on the microphone stand. Kahu looked out across the people, and beyond them, to the land that raised them all. Then he spoke. "They say we need overseas contracts to bring in jobs. They say we must open the gates to corporations so money can flow." He held up the patu. "But I ask you this, where does the money go?" His voice echoed through the square, clear and unwavering. "It leaves our shores. It lines foreign pockets. And what's left behind? Exhausted land, polluted rivers, a broken people chasing broken promises." He turned slowly, addressing both the crowd and the silent windows behind him. "What are we without clean water, without birdsong, without wenua that can grow our food? Our wealth is not in concrete, not in boardrooms. Our wealth is in the land, the sea, the forest, and the people who still know how to care for it." Murmurs moved through the crowd like a wind. A tear rolled down a kaumatua's cheek. A schoolgirl clutched her mother's hand tightly. "Politicians come and go. 4 years here, 5 if they're lucky, But our tamariki will live for generations. They will inherit what you build or what you destroy. He stepped forward. I am not here to accuse. I am here to remind. We are not here to own the land. We are here to be part of it. Silence. And then the sky spoke. A sudden crack of thunder echoed across the city, sharp and splitting like a taiaha striking stone. Cameras shook. People looked up. Clouds gathered swiftly above, not in chaos, but in movement. They spiraled, forming a wide ring above the Parliament buildings. Then, within that spiral, a single formation emerged. A koru. Not perfect, but unmistakable. A sacred spiral of cloud and motion, alive in the sky. People gasped. Some knelt. A few cried openly. Inside the building, someone dropped a pen. Outside, no one moved. The wind rose gently, lifting leaves from the ground in soft swirls. The trees on the Parliament lawn bent ever so slightly, not in fear, but in acknowledgement. The moment held like a heartbeat. Then Kahu lowered his patu. The time for selling out our future for temporary wealth has ended. Let the next chapter begin, one rooted in the land, not pulled from it. The cloud spiral held a moment longer, then slowly began to fade, as if folding itself back into the sky. He walked down the steps in silence. No chants, no protest signs, only presence. The ruru flew beside him. The fantail landed briefly on his shoulder. The kahu let out a single cry and soared eastward toward the hills, and behind him the stone steps of power remained. But they had changed, because now they had heard something older than politics. They had heard the voice of the land. Chapter 7. The Veins of Forest. Kahu stood in the centre of a bare paddock, dry and cracked from decades of overuse. Fences sliced through it like scars. The grass was brittle, the wind tired. Once, this place had been a thriving patch of native bush, filled with birdsong and undergrowth thick enough to walk without seeing the sky. Now, it was silent, but it wouldn't be for long. He had been invited by a group of local farmers, not activists, but people of the land who had begun to see things differently. They had heard him speak. They had watched the Parliament clouds spiral, and they had questions. They met in gumboots and oil-stained jackets, leaning on fence posts, arms crossed, unsure whether this barefoot man with a glowing patu could actually help. Kahu didn't talk about carbon credits. He didn't bring spreadsheets or studies. He just knelt down and pressed his hand to the earth. When you cut a body, it bleeds, he said. But when you cut the land, it forgets how to breathe. He looked up at them. You've cleared the trees. The soil has no roots to hold it. The rain washes it away. The heat cracks it open. Your water dries up. Your animals eat dust. A few of them nodded, quietly, reluctantly. What I'm asking is simple. Let the land reconnect itself. He walked the perimeter, patu in hand, and drew in the dirt with his heel. Plant native trees around the edges, then cut paths through your paddocks, like veins, weaving from forest to forest, coast to hill. Let the birds travel. Let the wind carry seed. Let the insects return. Let the shade cool the soil. You'll grow less grass, maybe, but you'll grow more life. One of the farmers, an older man with sunburnt skin and calloused hands, asked the question they were all thinking. And who's going to plant all that? Us? Kahu smiled and pointed to a truck pulling up at the gate. The back opened to reveal a group of teenagers, elders, and volunteers from the town, ready with gloves, spades, and trays of seedlings, kohai, harakeke, totara, pahutakawa. A woman stepped out with a clipboard and a shovel. We brought lunch too, she said. The farmers stared. Then one of them, without a word, grabbed a shovel and walked toward the nearest fence line. The rest followed. By midday, the first row of native trees stood planted. By sunset, 3 corridors had been traced across the property. They weren't wide. They weren't perfect. But they were enough. The earth felt different already. Softer, somehow. Grateful. Over the following weeks, the idea spread. People in other towns began asking about forest veins, how to plan them, how to plant them. Councils offered seedlings. Nurseries donated young trees. Volunteers came from everywhere. Everywhere Kahu went, he walked the land first. He listened to it. He asked where the trees wanted to grow. And always the birds came. The Kahu circled high as if watching from above for the return of balance. The ruru perched low, blinking slowly from the shade of the new groves. And the fantail darted joyfully through the new growth, a messenger of approval, always just ahead. In one town, a girl planted a kauai with her grandmother. As they patted the soil around the roots, she looked up and said, "It's like we're giving the land back its blood." No one corrected her. Kahu walked through a new forest path one morning, just a few months after it had been planted. He paused beneath a line of totara. The sun filtered through the leaves, and for a moment he saw it. The shimmer, not glowing, not obvious, just a soft emerald radiance, like the trees had caught the light and were holding it longer than they should. The Patu pulsed gently at his side. He reached out and touched a leaf. It trembled under his finger, not from wind, but from something deeper, a current. "You're waking up," he whispered. That evening, at a community gathering beneath the trees, he stood on a flat stump and spoke again. "Farmland should not be bare. Every paddock deserves a border of trees. Every field should breathe with its neighbors. Let us create veins of forest, arteries of life, so the land can remember itself." The people clapped, not loudly, but steadily, like a heartbeat. Chapter 8. The Fire and the Stone. The mine crouched like a wound on the coast. Machines groaned across the hillside, tearing into the earth. Diesel hung heavy in the air. Black pipes snaked across the rocks like veins in reverse, pumping not life, but death. Kahu stood on the ridge above, the sea wind tangling his hair. Below, excavators carved into red clay, pushing deeper with every hour. The company had won emergency approval, citing economic need and foreign investment opportunity. The locals hadn't been told until it was too late, but the land had known, and so had Kahu. He arrived alone, Patu strapped to his back. By the time he reached the fence line, others had followed. People from the community, activists, fishermen, students, elders with walking sticks and fierce eyes. There were no signs, no slogans, just silence, presence. The company's security guards shifted nervously. No one was shouting, but the air was charged, like the space between lightning and thunder. Kahu walked calmly to the center of the site, to where the clay met the rock, and the rock met the sea. A giant digger idled there, steel teeth glinting in the sun. He raised his patu. "This is sacred land," he said aloud. "It holds bones and memory. It holds Māori, and it is tired of being torn apart." The workers hesitated. Some lowered their heads, others scoffed. One man laughed. "You gonna pray the machines away?" Kahu said nothing. Instead, he stepped forward, knelt at the edge of the cliff, and touched the earth with his hand. Then he stood, walked to the very edge where the cliff met the ocean, and planted his patu into the stone, striking it once, hard, like a heartbeat. The sea responded. Far below, the waves stilled, then shifted. The tide pulled back, not just a little, but far, as if inhaling. Gasps echoed behind him as the water withdrew hundreds of meters, revealing reefs and shells that hadn't seen light in generations. And then, from the horizon, it returned. Not as a wave, as a spout. A swirling water spout rose from the sea, spiraling into the sky, a column of seawater and wind, turning like a whale released from the deep. It moved with intent. It slammed down into the mine like a storm made of justice. Salt water blasted the machines. Metal shrieked. Rust bloomed instantly across engines and cables. Cranes bent. Pipes burst. Tracks seized. The machines aged decades in seconds, seized by oxidation and the fury of the sea. Steam rose from their bones. The workers ran, not out of fear, but out of awe. Something older than them had arrived, something that had been watching for too long. And then, from the shallows, it came. A giant tuna, an eel as long as a car, glowing faintly with ancestral light, rose from the flooded trench and looked directly at Kahu. It lingered, then slid back into the water and vanished. A few elders dropped to their knees. One woman wept openly, whispering, "Ngā tuna kua hoki mai. The guardians have returned." The waterspout dissolved into mist, and the sun broke through the clouds. The sea was calm again. The mine was silent. Kahu pulled his patu from the stone. The air around him shimmered slightly, not from heat, but from power released. He turned to the crowd. "The land will protect itself if we let it, but we must stand in its name first. We are not its owners. We are its children." News spread within hours. Footage leaked, the rusted machines, the spout, the tuna. Officials called it a freak weather event. But the people knew. The land had drawn a line. That night, Kahu sat alone by the tide, rinsing his patu in the salt. The ruru landed beside him. The kahu watched from a high cliff. The fantail fluttered down and tapped the rock once, as if in approval. Kahu whispered into the waves, "I am yours." The sea didn't reply, but it stayed. Chapter 9. The Ones Who Follow. Kahu never asked anyone to follow him. He didn't call himself a leader. He didn't form a party, wear a badge, or carry a flag. He simply walked, and the land walked with him. But people began to show up, not out of loyalty to him, but to something they felt stirring inside themselves. They didn't come all at once. They came like rain. First a few drops, then a slow shower, then a steady stream. The first was Tarina, a kuia from down south, her knees creaky, but her eyes sharp. She had watched Kahu's parliament speech on an old laptop and whispered to herself, "Finally, someone's speaking in the right direction." She met him at a forest planting and didn't say her name, just began planting beside him. At the end of the day, she handed him a woven pouch. "Rongoa seeds," she said, "medicines for tomorrow." She never left his side after that. Then came Matthew, a young man with tattoos up his neck and a past heavy as stone. He had been sentenced to community service, but after one day planting trees alongside Kahu's crew, he asked if he could stay. "I've broken a lot of things," he said. "Maybe I could grow something now." Kahu nodded. He gave him a pair of gloves and a task: "Teach the boys who come after you." Haina, an artist from Wellington, arrived with a camera and a voice like Waiata. She had once worked in advertising until she saw the dolphins spinning in spirals during Kahu's ocean gathering. She gave up her job that day. Now she travelled with them, documenting each garden, each speech, each moment of magic, not to viralize, but to remember. She painted murals on water tanks. She drew the birds that followed Kahu into corners of buildings. She designed posters not to promote, but to plant questions. There was also Noah, a boy of about 10, who simply showed up one morning with a school bag, a carved tokotoko too big for him, and a question: "Can I help the trees grow faster?" He never really said where he came from, but he knew when rain was coming. He could find underground springs with a stick, and birds landed on him like he was a branch. They let him stay. More came. A mother with her 3 children, escaping the city to grow kai in the valley. A Pakaha retiree with a background in forestry who brought his chainsaw, not to cut trees, but to clear fences. A local radio host who gave them airtime every morning, even if it cost her listeners. They came because they felt something bigger than politics, something older than law. They called themselves nothing, no name, no brand, but others began to call them Te Hakoi Wakaura, the walk of healing. They moved across the motu like a river. Each town they visited, they left something behind: a garden, a forest corridor, a gathering, a promise. And each time, someone stayed behind, choosing to carry the work forward in their own way. One night, they camped under a stand of young totara trees. The fire crackled low. Tarina told a story of the taniwa who lived in her childhood river. Noah had fallen asleep curled up with a flax cloak over his legs. Machu was carving a handle for a digging stick. Hina painted a silhouette of the kahu circling above. Kahu sat at the edge of the firelight, Patu on his lap, eyes on the stars. The ruru hooted once low and warm. The fantail fluttered in and perched on a branch near Noah's head. And the kahu, as always, circled, silent, steady. Hina looked up from her brush. "You ever think about stopping?" she asked. Kahu shook his head. "I'm not walking to reach an end," he said. "I'm walking so others can begin." That night, the wind moved through the trees like a sigh. The firelight flickered across sleeping faces, and in the distance, the land dreamed of seeds and rivers and hands in the soil. Chapter 10. The Cave Returns. The glowworms were waiting. They blinked like stars inside the cave, casting the ceiling in a silent, living constellation. Kahu stood at the entrance, alone, just as he had been the first time, though everything in him had changed. The patu at his side still pulsed softly. The spiral pendant at his chest shimmered faintly in the cave's breath, but now it was not guidance he sought. It was return. He stepped inside. The path was the same, but he walked it differently now. His steps were slower, grounded. He didn't feel the need to prove anything. He wasn't waiting for a sign. He simply came to listen, not to the warawa, but to himself. And still, they came. The glowworms above shimmered brighter as he entered the heart of the cave. The air thickened, not with fear, but with reverence. At the center pool, the water was still, black, perfect. Kahu knelt beside it, placing the Patu gently on the stone. He closed his eyes and breathed. There was no flash of light, no sudden vision, only stillness. Then, a voice, the same as before, but deeper now, not louder, but closer. You have walked the words I once gave. Kahu opened his eyes. She stood before him again, the ancestor in the feathered korowai, her moko glowing softly, her eyes full of stars. But this time, she was not above him, not before him. She was beside him. When first you came, she said, you were searching. Now you carry the answer. She reached out and placed her hand gently over his heart. The land is stirring. The sea is turning. The people are waking. Not because of your power, but because of your presence. You listened. Kahu lowered his head, not in shame, but in humility. I've made mistakes, he whispered. I've doubted. I've been tired. The woman smiled, not with her mouth, but with her whole being. Even the river rests before the flood. Even the sun sleeps before the dawn. You are not asked to heal everything, only to walk in the direction of healing. The pool before them shifted. No longer a mirror, now a window. He saw towns with thriving gardens, coastlines with bustling fish markets, forests weaving through farmland, children climbing trees planted by their own parents, marae gardens, schools with compost piles and seed libraries. He saw joy, not as spectacle, but as everyday sacredness. He also saw more to be done, dry lands yet to be nourished, rivers yet to be cleared, people still searching. You are not finished, she said, but you are found. Then she handed him something, a cloak of woven fibers laced with small green leaves, feathers, and threads of flax and copper. This is not for status, she said. It is for memory. Wear it when your heart forgets. Kahu nodded. He didn't need to speak. She stepped back, fading not like mist, but like light pulled gently into the stone. The glowworms above dimmed softly, as if they too were bowing. Kahu sat for a while longer. Then he stood, lifted the patu, and wrapped the cloak around his shoulders. He walked back through the cave slowly, letting the quiet settle in his bones. At the entrance, dawn light filtered in through trees he hadn't noticed before. Young trees, sprouting near the stones, leaves trembling like fingers reaching for sun. He stepped outside. The ruru was waiting on a branch. The kahu soared above in wide spirals. The pacha waka waka flitted down and hovered in front of his chest, circling once around the spiral stone, then darted ahead. The signal was clear. The path continued, and so did he. Chapter 11. The Children and the Tree. The school was small, just 2 classrooms, 1 playground, and a patch of dusty grass out back where someone had once tried to grow tomatoes. When Kahu arrived, the tamariki were waiting. Some sat cross-legged on woven mats. Others stood clumped near the fence, staring at the man they had seen on the news, the one with the owl and the walking stick made of light. The principal greeted him with a nod and a whisper. They've been asking about you, non-stop, especially the ones who don't usually talk. Kahu smiled. He didn't come with a speech, no whiteboard, no slideshow. He came with a sapling, a small kōhai carried in a flax basket, its golden buds just beginning to form. He knelt before the children and placed it on the ground. Do you know what this is? He asked. One boy raised his hand. It's a baby tree. Laughter rippled softly, but Kahu nodded. That's right, but it's also a promise. If we take care of it, feed it, give it water, it'll grow. And not just into a tree, but into a home for birds, a shade for our elders, a gift to those who come after us. And if we forget it, walk past it, treat it like nothing, it will die. The kids grew quiet. One girl touched a leaf gently with her fingertips. Can I plant it? All of you will, Kahu said, together. They dug the hole behind the school. Matthew from the travelling group helped, teaching the kids how to loosen the soil and check for stones. Tarina laid down a circle of compost and herbs around the base. Hina took photos, then put the camera down to place her hands in the dirt too. Even Noah joined in, his small hands patting the ground with quiet precision. And when it was done, they stood in a circle around the kōhai. The sun caught the golden buds and made them glow like lanterns. A tui landed nearby and began to sing. Afterward, Kahu sat with the children in the shade and asked them a question. If you could change one thing about how the world works, what would it be? A girl raised her hand. Make sure no one ever feels lonely. A boy said, I'd let everyone grow their own food and not get in trouble. Another said, I'd give trees the right to vote. The group laughed, but Kahu smiled wide. Maybe they already do, he said. You just have to know how to count their voices. Before they left, one of the children, a quiet boy who hadn't spoken the whole time, handed Kahu a folded piece of paper. I drew something, he said, for you. Kahu opened it. It was a drawing, rough, made with coloured pencil, of a man standing on a hill with birds all around him, his patu glowing like a green sun. In the background were trees, stars, and children planting things. At the bottom, in big blocky letters, it said, Thank you for helping the earth. Kahu folded the drawing and placed it inside his flax pouch. I think the earth would say the same to you. That evening, as the travelling group sat around the fire outside the school grounds, the kauhai tree shimmered in the fading light. Tarina poured kawakawa tea. Matu sharpened his spade. Hina hummed a lullaby as she cleaned her brushes. Kahu watched the flames and whispered, They already know what to do. We just have to make space for them. The ruru hooted softly from a branch above. The kahu circled, once then, disappeared into the dusk, and the fantail landed near the base of the sapling, fanning its tail as if to say, This one will grow tall. Chapter 12. The Last Speech. The clearing was deep in the Ngangahira, a wide sacred space where sunlight filtered through ancient canopy like golden mist. The trunks of towering trees stood like pillars, roots coiled with the stories of generations. It had been chosen not for its convenience, but because the land had called for it. No stage, no microphones, no barriers, just earth, trees, and people. And they came, from the coasts and valleys, from cities and bush towns, from Wenua far north to far south. Tamariki on shoulders, elders in wheelchairs, students with sketchbooks, builders with dirty hands. Thousands moved through the forest quietly, as if entering a place of worship. They did not cheer. They sat, they listened. Kahu stood barefoot at the heart of the circle, beneath the largest totara. The patu at his side pulsed with warmth. His cloak of leaves and fibre hung light on his shoulders. The spiral pendant glowed faintly against his chest. The ruru watched from the nearest branch. The kahu circled above, unseen but known. The pawakawaka danced through the trees like punctuation between breaths. He waited until even the forest was still. Then he spoke. You already know what I came to say, because you've heard it in the wind, in the water, in the silence between things. This isn't about me. It never was. It's about the land, and it's about you. He looked around at the sea of faces, some teary, some smiling, some simply still. The land doesn't want us to worship it. It wants us to walk beside it. It doesn't ask for perfection, just participation. Put your hands in the soil. Catch your food with respect. Grow your own medicine. Share what you grow. Listen before you act, and act when others stay silent. A breeze moved through the crowd, gentle and cool. Birds called from the canopy. Leaves shimmered. The systems we've relied on have forgotten how to care, but we don't have to. We can remember. Not just how to grow, but how to live, together. He held up the patu. This isn't a weapon. It's a reminder, a key, a carving made by those who came before to help those who come after. He paused. You don't need one like this. Your hands, your voice, your actions, they are the tools. Don't wait for permission. The land already said yes. Silence followed, not of confusion, but of settling, like words finding their way down into soil. Then a movement. Petals began to fall from the trees above, not in a wind, not from shaking, just drifting softly, like the forest was shedding tears of joy. Golden, red, white, they floated down through beams of light, brushing heads and shoulders, settling on children's hair and elders' hands. Some wept, some whispered karakia, others simply closed their eyes. Kahu bowed his head, then stepped down from the centre, walking not away, but into the crowd. They parted gently, like trees making way for river. He smiled at a child holding a seedling, clasped hands with the man who once ran a bulldozer, pressed his forehead gently to the koya who had first planted rongoa at his side. He didn't need applause. He left with something deeper. The forest had heard, and so had the people. That night, as the crowd thinned and campfires flickered across the forest floor, Hina painted under moonlight, Tarina braided harakeka cords, and Noah carved a new walking stick beside the sapling they'd planted near the totara. Kahu sat beneath the stars, the patu warm in his hand. The ruru blinked from above. The kahu let out a distant cry, and the fantail, as always, hovered in front of him, then zipped away into the darkness as if saying, "There's still more." Chapter 13, The Light in the Leaves. Kahu walked alone, not because he was leaving anyone behind, but because some journeys must be walked in silence. The forest had grown fuller since his last visit. Paths once dusty now bore footprints and seedlings. Woven fences lined garden edges. Smoke curled from clay ovens tucked under trees. Everywhere, life was returning, not roaring back, but unfurling slowly, like a fern. He carried no banner, no followers, no announcement. Only his patu, his spiral stone, and the cloak of woven fibre, now patched with dust and pollen, smelling faintly of salt, earth, and harakeke. The birds knew him. The people waved, but didn't gather. They let him move like wind through a field. In one valley, he passed a roadside stall built from driftwood and corrugated iron. A child waved from behind it, standing next to baskets of fresh kumara, watercress, and whehoas. A sign read, "Grown here, shared here, koha or kai, swap welcome." In another town, he saw a circle of teenagers teaching younger kids how to plant sunflowers and carrots in a courtyard once filled with broken glass. One of them looked up, caught his eye, and simply nodded. No words needed. He visited a school where the children sang karakia before eating. They grew their lunch in a garden behind the classroom and painted signs for each native tree they'd planted. One girl ran up to him, breathless. "Mister, we found a stream behind the hill and we cleaned it. Now the tuna came back." Kahu knelt, smiling. "You listened?" he said. "No," she grinned. "We remembered." He passed riverbanks where willow had been replaced with flax and kahikatea. He watched elders teaching tamariki how to make balms from kawakawa and how to read the signs of the sky before planting. He found a young couple building a werepuni beside a spring, cooking soup for strangers, planting herbs in reused bathtubs. Everywhere he went, he didn't hear applause. He heard laughter, hammering, digging, singing. He saw eyes filled with purpose, not performance. At sunset, he sat beneath a pohodakawa tree that had once been dying. Now it was bursting with red. As the sun dipped behind the hills, the leaves caught the light, and for a moment they shimmered. Not with magic, but with vitality, like the land itself was smiling back. The light wasn't brighter, but somehow more alive. He breathed it in, and knew. The ruru called once from the shadows. The kahu passed above, wings glowing in the amber light. The pawakawaka flitted down and landed on a branch near his shoulder, looking at him as if to ask, "Do you see it?" He nodded. "It's happening," he whispered, "even without me." The fantail flicked its tail once and zipped off into the trees. Later that night, as the stars emerged and the land cooled, Kahu wrote in his journal beneath the tree, "I do not own this movement. I do not lead it. It is not mine to claim. I only walked where the land whispered, and the people remembered how to listen. The rest was already inside them." He closed the book, leaned against the tree, and let the land hold him for a while. Chapter 14, The Return. Kahu stood on the high ridge above the valley. Below him, the land stretched wide and open, not in conquest, but in welcome. Forests now flowed between farmlands like veins of green. Streams that once ran grey now shimmered with movement. Smoke rose from earth ovens, not factories. The sound of hammers and laughter echoed through the hills, human and wenua working together again. He breathed deep. The scent of kawakawa and clean soil filled his lungs. Somewhere in the distance, a child laughed. It had been many moons since he first placed the patu in the river, many paths, many voices, many moments when he didn't know what came next. And yet, here he was, not at the end, but at the beginning of balance. He walked slowly down the ridge, the sun casting long shadows behind him. The ruru hooted once from a low branch. The kahu soared in wide spirals overhead, wings catching the breeze. The puakawaka darted in quick loops ahead of him, guiding his path through the tall grasses like a living tohu. A sign. At the edge of the regrown forest, he met a small group planning the last of a corridor. They were young, teens, maybe early 20s, laughing, singing softly. They didn't stop when he approached. One simply looked up, grinned, and nodded. "Want to plant the last one?" Kahu knelt beside them. Together they placed the sapling into the earth, a totara, strong and steady. He pressed the soil gently around the base. The boy beside him asked, Do you think this is enough? Kahu looked around at the forest, the garden, the distant homes, the stream winding through it all like a blue ribbon of memory. It's a beginning, he said, and beginnings are powerful. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the land, Kahu stepped away for a moment of quiet. He reached into his cloak and pulled out the Patu. It still glowed, softly now, more like a heartbeat than a torch. He turned it over in his hands. The carvings had worn smoother with time. The spiral stone at its base was polished by years of sweat and soil. He considered burying it beneath a tree. He considered placing it in the river again. But something within him whispered, not yet. There was still more to do. Maybe not for him, maybe for others. But the work would never be done. And that was the beauty of it. He tied the Patu back to his belt, not as a weapon, not as a symbol, but as a reminder of where he began and of the path that still stretched forward through generations, through soil, through stories yet to be told. The rura called again, the fantail flitted into the branches, and the Kahu flew into the sunset, a dark shape against a glowing sky, leading the way into tomorrow. Kahu smiled, then walked down the hill, into the people, into the trees, into the earth, where the real journey, the quiet one, was just beginning. And so the journey of the Patu continues, not in the hand of one man alone, but in the hearts of many. Across Aotearoa, people began to rise like the morning mist, returning to the land, to the rivers, to the sacred rhythm of the earth. Gardens grew where concrete once ruled. Markets flourished with kai moana and kumara. Children ran barefoot through fields where their ancestors once walked, their laughter echoing with promise. The hawk still circled, the owl still watched, the fantail still danced ahead, guiding each generation forward. This was not an ending. It was a beginning dash, a remembering of who we are, of what we carry, of what we must protect. For the land is not ours to own. It is ours to guard, for the sea is not ours to take. It is ours to honor, and the future is not promised. It is grown in the soil we tend today, for the tamariki of tomorrow. The end.